While I was watching TV, my husband suddenly entered the room, and after his mother whispered something to him, his face changed to one of anger. He yelled at me, "Why are you wasting time?" and threw the TV at me. I was bleeding and begging for help as he dragged me by my hair and threw me outside. Shivering, I called my brother, and when he arrived, things got even worse than I could have imagined. My name is Harper Collins, and I'm about to tell you a story I never thought I'd experience, a story about love, betrayal, and finding my strength through terrible pain. 3 years ago, I would never have believed I'd be sharing this, but life can be surprising. It all started when I met Jonathan Carter. I was 26, living in Seattle, and working as a graphic designer. My life was calm and simple. Then Jonathan, a 30-year-old banker, entered my life. He was charming, polite, and made me feel special. Our relationship moved fast, romantic dinners, walks by the water, and deep conversations. 6 months later, he proposed, and I said yes without hesitation. Everyone thought we were the perfect couple, and I believed it too, but as time went on, I learned that perfection isn't always real. After we got married, we moved into a beautiful house. At first, it felt perfect. I worked hard to make the house a home, cooking Jonathan's favorite meals while he worked long hours. I missed him during the day but thought it was all part of our future together. Then, things started to change. Jonathan's mother moved in a few months after we married. She said she needed help, but soon it became clear that she was trying to control everything. Patricia, his mother, was in her late 50s, a retired teacher with strong opinions about everything: how I should dress, how the house should be run, and even what I should cook for Jonathan. At first, I tried to get along with her. She was my husband's mother, after all, but no matter what I did, it wasn't enough for her, and soon, Jonathan started agreeing with her. "Harper, Mom's just trying to help," he'd say when I expressed my concerns. "You should listen to her, she knows what she's talking about." It hurt, but I hoped things would get better, but they didn't. One night, after a long day of housework, I was sitting on the sofa watching TV, trying to relax. I thought about my father, who had passed away a year before our wedding. The TV was his gift to me, and watching it always brought me comfort. Jonathan came home late. He looked tired, but greeted me with a smile. For a moment, I thought maybe the evening would be calm, but then Patricia whispered something to him. His face immediately changed, and he glared at me. "Get up," he ordered. "Go to the kitchen and make me a fresh meal." I was surprised. "Dinner's already ready, Jonathan. I kept it warm for you." "I don't want that," he snapped. "I want something fresh, now." I hesitated, exhausted, and asked if he could just eat what was ready, but before I could finish, he exploded. "How dare you talk back to me?" He grabbed the TV, my father's TV, and threw it at me. It hit me on the side of the head, and I fell to the floor, bleeding. I was too shocked to even cry. I could only stare at him. "Maybe this will teach you to obey me," he muttered. Patricia, standing nearby with her arms crossed, said, "You don't deserve to be here if you can't respect us." I begged for help. "Jonathan, please, I'm hurt," but neither of them cared. Jonathan dragged me to the door and shoved me out into the cold night. Shaking and bleeding, I didn't know what to do. I called my brother, Daniel. He answered quickly, "Harper, what's wrong?" "Jonathan, I need help." "Daniel, please." "Where are you?" he asked firmly. "I'm coming right now." I gave him my location and waited in the dark, overwhelmed by fear. How did my life end up like this? When Daniel arrived, he looked furious and worried. He helped me into his car and drove me to the hospital. "We'll fix this," he said. "He's not going to get away with this." As the doctor treated my wound, I felt a small glimmer of hope. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to put up with this, but I knew this was just the start. Jonathan and Patricia had hurt me deeply, and I was determined to make sure they faced the consequences. Sitting in the hospital, I was shaking with fear. The pain in my head was bad, but the pain in my heart was worse. Daniel stayed by my side, silent but angry. He didn't say anything, but I could feel his rage. He was waiting for me to be ready to talk. Once we got to Daniel's apartment, he sat me down and handed me a glass of water. "Harper, tell me everything. I need to know what's been going on." I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew I had to tell him, so I explained everything. From Patricia's constant interference to Jonathan becoming more distant. I told him how I tried to make things work, how I hoped it would improve, and how it all led to that terrible moment when Jonathan threw the TV at me. Daniel listened carefully, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. By the time I finished, he was furious. "He's a monster," Daniel said, his voice full of anger, "and his mother is just as bad. Harper, you can't go back there, ever." "I know," I whispered, tears streaming down my face, "but what do I do? They've made it clear I don't belong there. I don't even have my things." "Forget about your stuff," Daniel said firmly. "Your safety is what matters. We'll figure out the rest, but first, We're going to make sure they pay for what they've done. I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't alone. Daniel was there for me, and I knew he would help me through this. Over the next few days, I stayed with Daniel, trying to heal both physically and emotionally. He helped me start the divorce process, and although it was tough, it also felt freeing. Cutting ties with Jonathan felt like reclaiming a part of myself, but I knew the divorce wasn't enough. I still felt angry and humiliated, and I wanted justice. Jonathan and Patricia had taken away my trust, my confidence, and my sense of safety. I couldn't let them get away with it. One night, while sitting in Daniel's living room, I said, I want to do more than just leave him. I want to expose him for what he really is. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean he's hiding something, I said, my voice shaking but determined. He's always been secretive about his work, his late hours, the strange phone calls. It doesn't add up. Daniel thought for a moment. You could be right. If he's hiding something, we'll find it. Let's dig deeper. That's when we decided to hire a private investigator. Daniel found Jack Lewis, a well-known investigator with a good reputation. When we met him, I explained my suspicions about Jonathan's work at the bank. Jack listened carefully, took notes, and promised to start looking into it right away. The waiting was torture. Every day, I wondered what Jack would find. Part of me worried I was being paranoid, but another part of me, the part that had lived with Jonathan's lies, knew there was something shady going on. Then, 2 weeks later, Jack called. I found something, he said. Can we meet in person? My heart raced as Daniel and I drove to Jack's office. When we sat down, Jack showed us the evidence. It was worse than I could have imagined. Jonathan wasn't just controlling, he was a criminal. He had been stealing money from the bank, hiding it in fake accounts, and sending it to offshore accounts. Jack had documents, account statements, and even photos that proved it. I stared at the evidence, trying to process it. I knew he was hiding something, I said quietly. This is huge, Daniel said, his voice serious. We need to take this to the police. Jack nodded. You should, but be careful. People like Jonathan don't take kindly to being caught. A chill ran through me, but I knew Jack was right. Jonathan was dangerous, and this was bigger than just me. He had hurt other people, and I couldn't let him keep doing it. The next day, Daniel and I went to the police with Jack's evidence. Detective Rebecca Hayes, who was assigned to the case, listened carefully as we explained everything. This is solid, she said, flipping through the papers. We'll start an investigation right away. Leaving the station, I felt a mix of emotions, fear, relief, and a strange feeling of strength. For so long, I had felt trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape, but now, I was fighting back. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I might actually win. What I didn't know was that the fight had just begun. The days after meeting Detective Hayes felt like a blur of nervous energy. The police had taken over the investigation, and I waited anxiously for updates. I kept thinking about Jack's warning. Jonathan was dangerous. I had always known he could lose his temper, but now I saw him for what he really was, someone who broke the law, betrayed trust, and lived a lie. I tried to stay busy, focusing on anything that could distract me. Daniel was always there for me, checking in and reminding me I wasn't alone. But even with his support, I couldn't shake the fear. I knew that once Jonathan found out, there would be no turning back. A week later, Detective Hayes called me in for a meeting. When Daniel and I arrived, she had a folder on her desk and a serious look on her face. We've made a lot of progress, she said, motioning for us to sit. Thanks to the evidence your investigator gave us, we've confirmed that Jonathan is part of a large money laundering operation. He's been stealing from the bank for over 2 years and hiding it through fake companies. The extent of his crimes is huge. Hearing it all laid out like that took my breath away. I had suspected something, but I never imagined it was this bad. What happens now? I asked, my voice shaky. We have a strong case against him, Detective Hayes replied. We've started watching his movements, and we're preparing to arrest him. But you need to be careful. Once he realizes what's happening, he might try to contact you, or worse. I nodded, trying to steady my nerves. I won't let him get to me, I said, though deep down I was scared. As we left the station, Daniel turned to me. You're handling this so well, Harper. I know it's hard. It is, I admitted, but I have to see this through. After everything he's done, I can't just let him go. That evening, I sat alone in Daniel's living room, staring out the window. My mind kept going back to when I first met Jonathan. How could the man who once promised me a happy future be the same one who hurt me so badly? The betrayal cut deep, but it also made me more determined. He had taken enough from me. It was time for him to face the consequences. The next few days were tense. I kept wondering what would happen when Jonathan was arrested. Would he try to fight back? Would he deny everything? Part of me feared the confrontation, but another part of me, one I barely recognized, wanted to see him finally get what he deserved. Then, the call came. Detective Hayes told us Jonathan had been arrested earlier that morning. He didn't resist, she said, her voice calm, but he's claiming he's innocent. He says it's all a misunderstanding. Of course he is, I said, bitterly. That's what he always does, pretend to be the victim. Even though he denied everything, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Knowing he was in custody, even for a short time, gave me a sense of safety I hadn't felt in months. But I knew this was just the beginning. The next step was the trial, and I would have to face everything again to make sure he paid for what he did. As I prepared for the trial, memories of Jonathan haunted me. I remembered the way he looked at me with anger when I didn't meet his impossible expectations. I remembered crying myself to sleep, wondering why I wasn't enough for him. And I remembered the moment he threw me out, bleeding and broken, like I meant nothing to him. But those memories didn't break me, they made me stronger. I channeled my pain into determination, knowing I had to stand up, not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever been made to feel powerless. The day of the trial came faster than I expected. The courtroom was intimidating, with its high ceilings and rows of wooden benches. I sat with Daniel, holding his hand for support. As Jonathan was led in, he looked calm, almost smug, as if he believed he could talk his way out of this. But as the prosecution presented the evidence, the documents, the surveillance photos, the testimony from the investigator, I saw his confidence start to crumble. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with shaky legs, but my heart was steady. I told my story, the abuse, the lies, the night he hit me with the TV. My voice wavered at times, but I didn't stop. I wasn't going to let him silence me again. Jonathan's defense tried to paint me as a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge, but the evidence against him was undeniable. By the end of the trial, it was clear to everyone in the courtroom that he was guilty. The judge's verdict came swiftly. Jonathan was convicted of embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. When the gavel struck, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. He couldn't hurt me anymore. As we left the courthouse, the sun was shining, but I still felt weighed down. It was as though the weight of everything I'd been through was finally sinking in. "You did it, Harper," Daniel said, his voice full of pride. "You stood up to him." I nodded, my throat tight. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." The weeks after the trial were a blur. Moving forward wasn't as simple as I had hoped. I still carried the scars, both physical and emotional, of everything Jonathan had done. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, reliving the fear and pain, but each day, I reminded myself that I was stronger than those memories. I had survived, and I wasn't going to let them define me. One of the first steps I took toward healing was reclaiming my independence. I moved into a small apartment in downtown Seattle. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and a tiny kitchen, but it was mine. Each piece of furniture I chose, each picture I hung, felt like a declaration of my new life. For the first time, I had a space that was truly mine, free from Jonathan's shadow. Work became another refuge. I poured myself into my designs, finding comfort in the creative process. My boss, always supportive, gave me bigger projects, and slowly, my confidence began to rebuild. It wasn't easy, doubts would still creep in, but each success proved to me that I was capable. Through it all, Daniel was my rock. He checked in constantly, whether it was bringing groceries or just sitting with me, watching movies, and talking about anything but the past. His constant support reminded me that I wasn't alone. One day, as I was going through old papers, I found a photo from my wedding. Jonathan was smiling at me, his arm around my waist. I stared at it for a long time, trying to reconcile the man in the photo with the man who had hurt me so deeply. Eventually, I tore the picture in half and threw it away. It felt like I was finally letting go of the version of him I had once loved. But my healing wasn't just about forgetting, it was about learning. I reflected on everything I had been through and realized how much stronger it had made me. I had discovered a resilience I never knew I had. I had faced betrayal, humiliation, and pain, and I had survived. I wasn't the same person I had been when I married Jonathan, but I was okay with that. The new version of me was braver, wiser, and determined to never let anyone take away my power again. Jonathan's sentencing made headlines, and the bank he worked for issued a public apology for not catching his crime sooner. I heard that his mother, Patricia, had moved away, likely out of embarrassment. Part of me wanted to confront her, to demand an apology for how she treated me, but I realized it wasn't worth it. She wasn't worth my energy. My future was. One evening, Daniel and I went out for dinner at a small Italian restaurant to celebrate. It wasn't a big occasion, but it felt significant. As we clinked our glasses together, Daniel said, "To your freedom." "To my freedom," I echoed, smiling for the first time in ages. It was a genuine smile, one that came from a place of peace. Now, as I reflect on everything, I realize how far I've come. What happened to me was horrific, but it didn't break me. It taught me that I deserve better, that I have a voice and a right to stand up for myself. and most importantly, it taught me that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a way out. Jonathan may have thought he could control me forever, but he underestimated me, and now, as I look ahead to the future, I know one thing for sure: I'm free. Free to live, to dream, and to build a life on my own terms, and that, to me, is the greatest revenge of all.